So as you can see, I'm now the finance director. My colleague has gone on maternity leave, so I'm holding the fort, or else she'd be here speaking to you today, but it's my privilege to talk you through the project that we've worked very closely with Amanda on. And it was successful. We, as Amanda said, we had a great deal of deadlines and pressure on us to provide these systems to quite a few people, and that involved us being ready and able to provide training and a live system as soon as the vote to restructure went through. So we're really grateful to Amanda for all the work she did with us, and it was, as I said, successful. You'll see this presentation is fully netballed. I got one of the colleagues at work who's a young PR girl, so get ready for all the netball photos. That's me. So when you talk about Netball New Zealand, everyone immediately thinks the Silver Ferns, and that is our flagship brand. There's a lot more to us than that. Obviously the Silver Ferns are amazing, and we love to present events, and they're fantastic ambassadors for young women, and you never see them falling out of bars like certain other codes. I don't know if that's our good PR team or if it's just our good team, I'm not sure. We also look after about 140,000 netballers, and our role is really to provide pathways to become a Silver Fern, and if you're not going to make the giddy heights of that, it's to provide a great game at a community netball level. It's also about training the umpires, coaching the coaches, and making sure there's a succession plan for all of the Silver Ferns and all the age groups too that make up our core business. So yes, we restructured. It's been an ongoing process. Originally we had 33 areas of New Zealand, and that went down to 12. And our recent restructure was we had to get the votes down to 5. Originally we had 5 ANZ champ teams. You may know those as the Mystics, the Tactics, Steel. You would have heard those names bandied about, and it's a great competition that we have with Australia. They bore they had 12 regions that they all reported to, so we had 5 ANZ champs teams. They could have 2 or 3 boards they had to report to about their performance, and we wanted to refine that. We wanted to ensure that netball was a stable sport and link those ANZ champ teams to a specific region, I shouldn't call them that, zone. We had to go to all of the netball centres, who are the people who administrate at grassroots level, and get the vote. Now that was why the pressure was on, because if the vote didn't go through, all our work was in vain, but it did go through, and so we had to hit the ground running and provide these 5 zones and Netball New Zealand with a brand new 2013 NAV system. We also, I'll just run through that really, we've done a high performance section, we're community netball and we're administration and events. So we're not just netball, throwing the ball around a court, there's a lot more to us. So each of those regions had different accounting packages. We couldn't see some of them. Some people were really keen to show us their figures, other people were quite keen to do it themselves. There's nothing wrong with that, but we needed to ensure that netball was going to last into the future, given we had to pay for ANZ champ games, and we really wanted to improve the governance. 2 boards is too many. We ourselves needed to improve our reporting, and we needed to be able to see if, I'm trying not to be disparaging of other codes, but certain other codes had issues with profitability, and we wanted to ensure that wasn't going to be an issue for netball. So those are the key drivers of the change. So after the change, we had a system that would allow us to view all of the 5 zones. So we can look at mainland and tactics and see how much their accommodation cost for their entire season. Or we can have a look at South to see how much they're paying their CEO. And we use that information to help us with economies of scale to keep them on track, to keep them accountable, and to make sure that they are achieving all the aims that these zones have set out to do. So this is what we did with Intergen. We created separate entities. They own them, and we have an administrator in each zone. We took it on board to train them up. And they're not all accountants. That's been probably our biggest challenge, is that these people out there wear different hats. They may create an event one week and do the accounting and put the accounts payable into the system the next. So we had to be there to support them and provide a help desk and come up with all sorts of solutions to their quite creative problems that they created themselves. They're all good people, and we're really lucky with who we've got, so we try and make sure that we get out to the zones and sit in their shoes and make sure that they feel supported. At Netball New Zealand, we can dip in and have a look at what they're looking at. That's been really useful. So they're sitting in Invercargill and we're sitting in Auckland, and they say, it's just not working, it won't post. And we're going, well, let me have a look, and I'll say, it doesn't balance. So that's been a really successful part of our business. And we can consolidate the result if we need to, but we're finding the greatest impact has been Auckland pays 35k for a venue. Why are you paying 50? Just a really good way of approaching maybe suppliers and approaching suppliers to say, okay, why don't you give a netball a deal? So that's been really successful for us. Another issue that we have is that we have a lot of stakeholders within our business. So we have High Performance Sport, which fund our Silver Ferns, and Sport New Zealand, which helps fund our community netball, and we're accountable to them, and we have to provide really detailed reports. So NAV actually allows us to cut and slice that information in a lot of different ways, and an example of that is when we did our high performance, we applied for 4 years funding to be able to achieve our biggest aim, which is to get back-to-back gold at the Commonwealth Games, which is next year in July, so everyone please watch. And so they want to know exactly how much we're spending on our coaches. And we can do that by running a simple, we call it function, I don't know if everyone does. We just run a report that shows all of our functions for coaching, and that falls out of the system. And that's been fantastic for us. So we've got consistent general ledgers across the zones, whereas before we had some pretty extreme Excel spreadsheets, and we're still working on getting the general ledgers similar. I mean, you can set your budgets till the cows come home, but it depends where they're going to code things, and that's what we're working on now. That's nothing to do with NAV. That's us controlling our different zones and educating them to make sure they put the bits in the right holes. Our board's really interested in how the zones are performing, so we can now provide that information without ringing 3 boards. And we can drill right down, so I can say, gosh, how much did it cost for us to go to the Invercargill Velodrome? If my CEO asks me. Hopefully she won't. And I can give them that. So we really appreciate the flexibility. And one of the other things that when we made the decision, we put it out externally to give us some ideas on systems that would meet the flexibility requirements. And netball's ever moving and has to be really receptive to change, because we might get a new funder who requires other things, or we need to supply other stakeholders with different information, and I think we're throwing around the ideas of databases, and NAV can talk to those, and that's why we're future proofing, I suppose is the buzzword, Netball New Zealand. Yes, so that's my comment. We're really at the mercy of whatever they want, because they're paying us the money, and we will provide that information as they require it. And we've got a new CEO who started on Monday, and she took one look at the reporting and said, but I want it this way. And I said, that's fine, I can do that. So, yeah, the flexibility really serves us well. Was that too fast? Would you like me to bang on a bit more?
No, that was fantastic. Any questions? Well, now I can join Craig.
Okay, well, not quite the Netball New Zealand story, probably more those people that are falling out of the pubs, over in the mining scene. So, got a couple of, so I guess this is our story with Swick Mining Services and their Dynamics upgrade that we went through. In terms of the content, so Phil Swick, I've got a wee video clip for him because he's actually attending our Sydney event, so he couldn't be here today, but he would have loved to have spoken to you about it directly, but I have a few words on his behalf. But what I thought before we run that is just give you a bit of an overview in terms of what the upgrade is all about. You know, how do we, why does it come about? When do you know when you've reached that point in time when you should be thinking about an upgrade? And, you know, how do we recommend that you go through it? And then just to wrap it up, so, just a summary of things to consider. So the drivers are really, two. Sounds like a horse race So the. You're going to have to speak up. Oh God, yeah. Okay, so in terms of the business advantage, they. It's not just talking about transporting the current state up into a currently supported version of the software. Most of the bulk of the reason why someone wants to upgrade is the fact that they want to introduce some process improvements and functionality improvement, extend the footprint, so get a whole lot more users into the system and start putting different operating processes through it. Okay, so it's functionality, business advantage focused. Also, they've got to balance that with the technology risk. So, we had a site the other day where they inadvertently applied an update to their server, and suddenly their old version of NAV was no longer compatible with it. So, you can, as the infrastructure around it change, I feel like we're at the horse races now. As the infrastructure around it changes, it becomes more and more difficult to maintain your instance. So, there's a bit of a balance there as well. There is lots of there's lots of info that you can find out about what it is that NAV 2013 introduces, and we've been through some of that today. Now that's a good website if you wanted an overview of what has changed between the different versions, and you're going to get a copy of these slides. So, but what it boils down to, and I'm not going to run through it, is around capability, mobility, collaboration, performance, integration, possibly the additional users, with that transfer of those light users into the full users from the prior version. But when we combine it with an upgrade, we really get a chance to relook at how we're doing things in the system. So do we want to have, across the business, adopt consistent processes? Do we want to change the way those operating processes are working? Is there anything, it's always going to be better to move back to the standard product. So are there any customizations that we can retire? What don't we need? Our business has changed. NAV, over the years, it's introduced a lot of new functionalities. So are there any add-ons, any customizations we've made that we can drop out as well? So it's a good opportunity to consider those. When we look at, now they're selling people next door. When we look at the upgrade approach options, we've got two extremes. So we can do a database upgrade, which basically says, let's just take the current state and all the data that you've got and plonk it into the new, shiny, flashy-looking version of NAV. Okay? Now we get a modest sort of change. We get to take advantage of the usability features that are in the current version. We're on a supported version, so Microsoft will still, release security updates, hot fixes for bugs in the system. But, it's pretty much as it was with the shinier front end. We can also, at the extreme other end, we can do a re-implementation. Now, that means almost, starting with a complete design again. Let's have workshops, let's get the key users together, let's identify what your requirements are, let's agree how the system needs to work. Okay? processes may be fundamentally altered as part of that. Okay, and we've got the option of saying, well, do we want to bring along some of the data, none of the data, and where you typically see that re-implementation coming through is where we've got very old versions. You know, if we're coming from version 3 and 4, you know, there's a number of jumps you've got to make to get to 2013. So it may cost less to re-implement. We've got a very different business model. You know, the whole chart doesn't work for us. The dimensions that we had, they don't work for us anymore. We want to rename so much stuff that, you know, there would just be a nightmare trying to do that in the existing version. We've got data quality issues. We had this with one of our sites. They didn't trust anything that the system told them about inventory, value, what it was, where it was. They just wanted to dump it, leave it behind and start again. And what we tend to do to tell you which path to travel is perform a diagnostic up front. Okay, we identify opportunity improvement. So we do get together with the users, we discuss what's working well, what's not. We look at the objects and we determine what the upgrade requirement around those is. So how many modified objects have you got? What's the degree of complexity in those? What modified objects do we not need to upgrade? You know, so if we're going back to standard or retiring some add-ons. And that gives us a cost and we can make a recommendation that can flow into a business case. The outcome of a diagnostic in our experience has typically been that we end up with either extreme, but somewhere between the two. We come up with a hybrid type approach. Okay? It is saying that some processes can benefit more than others from change. Okay? So the whole GL side of it, the core financials is working really well. But we do manufacturing, we do jobs, we do, you know, service management, whatever it might be. And they're the bits that we need to rethink about. They're the bits that we need to retool. So we look at that. So what customisations in those specific zones can we retire? You know, what customisations can we introduce? What add-ons can we introduce? What standard functionality can we introduce? What new users can we bring into the system? And then how do we integrate it with the other systems? So, you know, the current version, it's web service enabled, it's far easier to integrate. We've got the Dynamics connector, so if there's other applications we're using, we can leverage that. So, you know, we get that future state view of how we want to apply it. We keep 70%, but we dramatically look at that last 30% where we can get some real business benefit out of. So, on to Swick Mining Services. So, they are the second largest of what they do in the world. They're a specialist mineral drilling contractor, above ground and below ground. These are the types of guys that can, you know, drill, you know, something this wide into a wall of rock 2 kilometres underground and steer that drill 2 kilometres away from where they are. They're an ASX listed company. They've had 30% growth for the last 5 years. They're moving offshore. They've got a big operation now in North America. They're moving into Portugal and Spain, Indonesia. They implemented version 4 7 years ago. They've got this thing called a plod record, which is a very mining specific term, but you know they had, and it's effectively a shift. Okay, so what they've done on a shift, who was involved, what consumables, how many metres drilled, but they had 1.2 million records, and a plod's a pretty significant record. Significant modifications to support the mining activity. And what we did is when we went through the diagnostic with them, as it turned out, the pure upgrade ended up being 1/3 of the cost of the whole project. Okay, so if we'd just done a current state upgrade into 2013, then that would have been about 1/3 of the overall cost. But we actually significantly changed a lot of the existing processes, and we brought in a lot of new processes into the system as well. So, you know, there was a pretty big change element for their organisation, and you'll hear Phil now talk about that. So, as I say, Phil's attending our Sydney event. He's the manager of their business systems. I did some pretty wonky camera work out there with him a couple of days ago. So you'll hear some background noises, you'll see some flies buzzing around and stuff like that. So it's that authentic Aussie experience. And it looks like right at the start I almost just about fall over as well. You can see how this goes.
We've been on Netball for about the past 7 years. It was largely originally constructed around our pod system, which is our transactional sort of drilling information, and largely created to be a historical transactional system. So we run our invoicing out of it, and sort of not really much else. We migrated into inventory control and sort of purchasing a couple of years after the original go live. And although it served us well, it really wasn't sort of where the company was moving in the direction that we were taking. We needed far more functionality. We needed to look at integrating other systems, and there was limited opportunities for that to happen in Netball. So the business case really was to move to a currently supported platform, which Ford no longer was, and look at ways we could expand it into other areas of the business. The big pushes for us was we were developing another system on a SharePoint platform for use out in the field, like a mobile device sort of application. And Nav4 wouldn't have coped with that. So now 2013 with SharePoint integration was a logical choice to sort of have that. The entire sort of process took the better part of 12 months. We started out with running a full diagnostic of the existing solution and sort of looking for opportunities to improve it, sort of removing non-value-added processes, automating a lot of manual tasks was the real goal of that diagnostic, to figure out ways that we could bend the new version to better suit our business. The diagnostic process itself involved workshops with key users in the company, who all had a chance to say sort of what they liked about the current system and what they'd like to see improved. Out of that came a full sort of diagnostic report from Intergen, and a ballpark costing. At that point, sort of the executive leadership team of the company reviewed it and sort of decided sort of how far we wanted to go, and sort of the project was kicked off based on their decisions. So from that point on, we took more functional workshops and came up with a functional design document, which was eventually signed off on and sort of the deliverables agreed on. And then we sort of kicked into the project, which has taken the better part of 6 months to get to the go live state. It was quite possibly harder than we anticipated, especially being a jump through 3 versions of NAV, from old NAV to new NAV. But now that we've gone live, there's been a few teething problems, as you would expect. But we're already seeing some good returns on process elimination and automation. Sort of originally it was treated as an upgrade, but the jump through 3 versions really has been more of a re-implementation. Okay, we brought a lot of our historical data with us, but from a user's perspective in particular, there has been a little bit of shock and awe, shall I say. It's a very, very different package to what Nav4 was. There's been a lot of positives out of it, definitely. There's been a lot of great comments. There's been a little bit of heartache because a few people have lost some of the functionality that they had before, but they've also gained as well, which is true with any re-implementation. There is no such thing as too much user acceptance testing. You'd think you'd want to put a number on it, but in reality, especially jumping through so many versions, more is definitely better. We possibly underestimated how much of that we were going to need, and from an internal resources perspective, you tend to not get as much of your key stakeholders' time as you'd probably like or need. If I had the chance to go back and do it again, I'd probably be a bit more demanding in how much of their time that I would take. But in the end, there was sort of, when we went live, there wasn't anything that was a complete showstopper. There was teething problems, there still are a couple of teething problems, but it's not something that's brought the business to a halt or anything like that. So we can work through those on a case-by-case basis. And the overall experience, I think, was, I'd call it a success, although it was harder than we thought it would be. some very positive comments, some not so positive comments, but I think sort of that's just a part of change. Sort of some people adopt it more readily, some people don't like change.
Yeah.
So that's just part of the course with a systems upgrade of this nature, and something that's been so comprehensive and so sweeping across the business.
Yeah.
We're also looking at integrating more functionality that was typically treated in isolation within the company.
Yeah.
Maintenance and requisitioning to the field, sort of inventory type processes that were typically handled outside of NAV, where sort of the roadmap is to incorporate more of those functionalities into the ERP. To really start utilising the power of NAV across the entire company, instead of just in a billing and sort of a functional sort of tracking capacity.
Okay. And it's also supporting your growth into North America or into Europe?
Yes, it is. That's sort of another reason for moving to NAV 2013, where we're seriously pushing towards being cloud-based, possibly in the next few years, something that NAV4 just fully couldn't cope with. But the technology roadmap for NAV is such that sort of cloud will be supported. So becoming a global company, that's becoming very important.
Okay, so yeah, it seemed like a good idea when we did it to go outside, but there were whirring machines all around us, and yeah. So, I guess that's, Phil's, at the coalface, his sort of views on their upgrade. They went live 5 weeks ago, so I took that a week ago, so that was about, they'd just gone through their first month end, post go live, and as I say, it was a pretty significant project with them. So where does that take us? Just to wrap up then, and then happy to answer any questions that anyone's got. So some things to consider. Technical versus a database upgrade. We used to do these things called a technical upgrade, or a client upgrade. You cannot do it to move to 2013. Okay, a technical upgrade meant that we could upgrade. You could retain your classic client. The classic client's been retired now, so it is only that role-tailored client, with all the flash visuals that you saw before. So the next time you do an upgrade, if you want to move to 2013, it has to be a full database upgrade, okay, upgrading all of the objects. Microsoft support for legacy version. Version 4, support's no longer provided by Microsoft. Version 5, mainstream support has ceased, which means you don't get any security updates, you don't get any hot fixes. Of course, your partner is going to support you to the best of our abilities. We just don't have the option of going back to Microsoft. Okay? Then again, if your system's working well now, in all likelihood it's going to continue working well. Are you entitled to the current version? You need to. There are penalties if you haven't maintained your maintenance. So if you are on a current maintenance plan, then you get that upgraded version, you get the current version for free, but it's something to consider. Obviously, a big thing to consider is what's it going to cost and how long is it going to take, how much change is it going to introduce. And every site is specific, how many version jumps have you got to go through, what's the number and nature of those modifications, how many new modifications or customizations do we want to introduce? What processes are we going to change? And what compelling benefit will you gain? Okay, now that's the key thing. We're obviously not going to go through an upgrade just for the sake of being on a current version. It really needs to be that compelling benefit piece. And the best way to understand what that is going to be and whether the business case stacks up is to run a diagnostic. Okay, so we can help you identify the changes. We can get with your key users, and we can very quickly say, is this a customization? Is this now in standard? If you want to make these types of changes to your chart, to your dimensions, whatever it might be, then these are the options you've got, and we can come up with a bit of a plan. Okay, it may be a long shopping list that we refine and sort of look at options, some in, some out, and the like. But at the end of the day, it'll be a long list that we can work backwards from. And then ideally, that will flow into a business case, or if the cost benefit's there, can get approved and you can go ahead with an upgrade. The other comment I'd say is we've actually seen a big uptake on upgrades through to 2013, and our view and other partners as well, talking to them, is that NAV has reached that stage where it's worth jumping to. Okay, 2009 was definitely a halfway house as far as NAV was concerned. Microsoft took it to a certain point, spent a lot of money re-architecting it to go to 3-tier and the like, but we've sort of really seen that come together, and particularly with the R2 version for NAV, with the fully enabled web client now. So yeah, possibly prior to that, especially with version 3 to 5 offered some good advantages, but from sort of versions 4 to 5 through to 2013, there really are some key advantages now. So, how are we tracking? Still 10 minutes to go, so we've got time for some questions. Any?
I'm going to ask what everyone is probably wondering. What's the average cost of a diagnostic?
The average, we are looking to take, in Swick's case, we spent 4 weeks doing the diagnostic because it was pretty significant. We did probably a mid-level. We could take it at quite a conceptual design level, but their whole processes, they didn't even understand them. They'd acquired a few businesses, so they had just a whole range of ways the same operating process was performed. So it was far more involved. That said, we've done diagnostics within 3 days as well. So a 6-week diagnostic would be very long. A 3-day diagnostic would be pretty quick. You're looking at more like a financials user. Any other?
So I was quite interested about the workshop that was conducted with the key users.
Mm-hmm.
Was process mapping introduced at that time?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that more, like how the key users responded?
So we really find that the only way to do it now is to do some process mapping. So it is even in terms of the whole way we run the workshops, they're very much sort of process based. So we before we go down, we do a current state walkthrough. In Swick's case, it was a new client to us. They moved from another partner, so we really didn't know anything about them. Now maybe there'd be less of a requirement if it was one of our existing clients. But we did a current state walkthrough, so we had a decent understanding of what it was they were doing in the current state, and sort of anticipating some of the problems. And then we came in a little bit prepared. So I already had like a rough mapping of what the processes were. So we'd agreed those with a couple of the super key users, if you like. And then that just formed a really good framework for the discussion. People knew when their opportunity to talk would come because they could see that. It was either not covered in that process, but tomorrow's session, or where the step in that process was that they could add to. So it wasn't just like a free-for-all. But yeah, we see, if you're really saying it's just minor tweaks, maybe there's no need to do that process mapping. But if you're talking about extending the footprint, turning on new functionality, process methodology is how we deliver systems these days.
Did you guys use the tool set to process map?
We just used Visio, so we kept it pretty basic, and it really just came down to how we flowed that through into functional and technical specifications that were driven off the back of it. So yeah, it was sort of Visio based with the lane mapping for the different roles and then the different tasks, and that worked well. Any other?
Hey guys. My question just related to back in their old version of NAV, did they have any customised NAV reports that needed to jump to reporting services? I take it.
So we transferred over 90 reports. They tended to be much more of a document based. Like they needed certain just sort of transactional reports through to their customers, particularly. All their BI was done through a tool called ClickView, which is a BI reporting tool. We needed to assist, so they had another provider that was doing the BI piece that supported them for that, and that was the lightest part of the whole project. So we had to help them translate where some of the data now needed to come from, because with the jump, some of the tables have been re-architected and how dimensions work is a bit different and how those values are stored. But yeah, it wasn't an overly complex piece, but all their BI stuff, yeah, that was handled separately. It was just reporting to the new tables. Yeah, the reports, just in terms of the upgrade, they are all now SSRS-based reports in the new version, so there is a fair degree of work that has to go through to transfer those over. Mark?
Craig, we heard earlier in the larger room from James and Mark that change management can really help the success of projects like this. Did either Swick or Netball New Zealand do anything significant around change management? Any lessons that did or didn't work well on that subject?
Gosh, there's a lot of personalities in netball, have a lot of opinions. And again, it goes back to the governance and trying to listen to all of the stakeholders, and there are a lot. So there was a lot of field trips out to talk to the centres to get them on board and to show them the benefits. So yes, we had a lot of what we call them roadshows, to try and get everyone on board and with the idea. As for specifically with NAV, we just said this is it, and it was so much better than what they had in terms of flexibility that they're coming around to the idea now.
I guess in Swick's case, there were a few change-resistant type people, but by far and away, most of the users wanted to move to something that was better. They had a lot of manual processes. It was, if that person was away, they almost fell down. They couldn't do billing, if a particular lady was away, so they had to be very careful about when annual leave was scheduled and things. And this is millions of dollars of billing every month. So they understood that there was a significant benefit. The main change, I guess, practice that we applied was lots of user involvement, a broad sign-off on the design, and then lots and lots of UAT. Now, Phil said that they didn't do enough UAT. They did 5 weeks of UAT, and we had a dedicated room set up. We had real-life scenarios in a key area. They ran in parallel for it. Their billing function is so important that they just can't afford to get that wrong at all. So yeah, those are probably the key change elements. But they wanted to adopt something, and we just made sure that they were familiar with it. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to be around after this. If anyone wants to have a chat about anything specific, then please feel free to come and get me.